What's up everyone, Ninth Jim here, back with another VGC 2020 Pokemon Sword and Shield competitive video. Today we're going over another popular strategy in depth, today being control teams and control behavior of teams. Not all teams have to be dedicated to control, however, most teams will have some form of control on their team, whether it just being, Intimidate on an Incineroar, or Milotic just being an alternate win con with Coil and Hypnosis, and it can really be you can really make your team very control or just a little bit of control as like a mode of your team or even just a part of your team. Honestly, control is in just about every bit of Pokemon, always has been, always will be, just because it's so powerful. These abilities like Intimidate and Will-O-Wisp and Snarl and other moves like that, just like limiting the amount of damage that your opponent can do, it's just very good in the game in general, even if that's not what your team is based on. So anyway, let's get into it. So, control. What does it mean to be a control team? So control teams really focus on controlling the pace of the game and kind of what happens in the game. Usually controlling your opponent's damage output with stats, things like Intimidate, the Snarl, Will-O-Wisp, things like that. Really controlling how much damage your opponent can do. Repeated Intimidate can be really insane. It can just be really strong. We've seen that really strong in 2018, 2019, 2017, things like the Landorus Therian, the Incineroar, Scrafty, Hitmontop, all of these really great Intimidate Pokemon, just being able to just cycle the Intimidate over and over against your opponent. It's just really, really powerful and just decimates their attack stat, making them do little to no damage, and you just buff up all your Pokemon right in their face and just show them how big your Pokemon are and how strong they are, while you're making them just really, really weak. You can just bulk up your team with a lot of different ways. Coil, max moves, Thunder Wave, that doesn't really bulk you up, Curse, a lot of different ways, and you can just really make your team insanely bulky while making your opponent do no damage, and that's a really good way of doing control. Like I said, most teams will have control elements, while not every team as a whole is a control team. This is like, it's pretty weird of a concept being control team. They get it a lot from TCG and other games like that kind of just control the pace of the game and control what your opponent does. And in Pokemon, you have it just as strongly as every other game. It's just very, very strong being able to do that. Like I said, most teams have control elements. Most will have like an Incineroar. We see Incineroar being one of the most used Pokemon in today's meta in VGC 2020 in mid-April. We see the most amount. We see so much Incineroar. We have things like Incineroar. We saw an insane amount of Arcanine in the early game, in the early meta, just being even actually more Arcanine early meta than we do now of Incineroar. Although when Incineroar initially came out, it was even more played than Arcanine was back when it was most used in VGC 2020, but still. Yeah, all of these Pokemon are really good. Are you seeing a trend? Intimidate, Snarl, fire types that are bulky are just really, really good. Honestly, any kind of types that are bulky, you see a lot of grass, bulky Pokemon, things like Ferrothorn, things like Amoonguss was really, really powerful in the past. Being able to set up Stun Spore and Stun Spore, Sleep Powder, really, really powerful Pokemon against everything. And then just being so bulky and having your Intimidate, cycling your Intimidate, being really, really annoying to most Pokemon, it can be really, really powerful. So anyway, what exactly kind of Pokemon are we using for these control type teams? So first off, we have our pseudo win con category. These are Pokemon like Snorlax and Milotic with Coil, Hypnosis, and bulk up bird like the Corviknight that has the Mirror Armor, so you can't really lower any of its stats, and then it just uses bulk up or iron armor, iron defense over and over, and then has Roost. All these Pokemon have some form of healing, whether it's Recycle in your Guava Berry or Figgy Berry or Iapapa Berry or Recover or Roost. You have some form of healing, so you essentially make them unkillable, so they really spiral. They really, through a couple of turns with maybe max moves, screens, something else of support from a different Pokemon, and then using their own moves, Curse or Bulk Up or Coil, just to be able to be really, really, really unkillable. And that's really what these Pokemon do. They become unkillable, they heal up when they're about to die, and then they start to put out slow damage later in the game. A lot of the times, it's really hard for a lot of teams to be able to do anything against these Pokemon. I've used Snorlax really early in the meta. I used Snorlax before we could even Gigantamax it. It was actually the first team that I Master Balled with in Sword and Shield, was a Snorlax-driven team where you Curse Lax, and it was really, really powerful. And you Curse Lax and then use AV Excadrill to max Steel Spike and max Quake to make it even more bulky. And then in the late game, you can easily 1v2, 1v3, even 1v4 Pokemon with just the Curse Lax. And we see that being a thing now with Milotic. A couple of teams, a couple of players did really, really well at big events using Pokemon like that, like the Milotic in our sample teams. I have a Milotic team that in an interview with the player, he really explained how powerful Milotic was, and I'll go a little bit more in depth in that once we get to that section of the video. But for now, we're talking about pseudo win cons, and all these Pokemon are just so powerful. Just being able to be unkillable and then heal off all the damage makes them really strong and a big piece of most control teams. The next we have is controlling Pokemon. These are Pokemon that really focus on minimizing damage and controlling the state of the game. Obviously, things like the Incineroar, the Arcanine, having Intimidate, Snarl, Will-O-Wisp, Parting Shot, all of these really good attacks that really focus on minimizing the damage output that your opponent has. Other things are like screen Pokemon like Lapras, Gmax Lapras. We have Grimmsnarl with both screens. Light Clay Pokemon, just being able to have damage or, quarter damage throughout the rest of the game or throughout multiple turns. That it really decides how powerful your opponent can be. Will-O-Wisping something and setting up a screen, or Thunder Waving something and setting up a screen. That Pokemon's doing half damage, half speed. It's really, really hard to kill your good Pokemon, your really strong Pokemon, when you're setting them up right in front of them. You just set them up while also just minimizing the damage with these control Pokemon. It makes it really, really hard for your opponent to beat you. Also, like I said, the Excadrill using Max Steel Spike and Max Spike. Using Max Steel Spike as well as Max Quick to just minimize the damage output by adding one to your own defenses and special defense, both of your Pokemon. It can become really hard to actually destroy these Pokemon once they're fully set up. I've been walled out by Corviknight before, being able to just set up multiple iron defenses and then body press and roost. And it's just really, really hard to take out these Pokemon once they are set up right in front of you. So on to part 2 of the control Pokemon. We have a couple of other things. So control teams are not made up of only control Pokemon and bulky Pokemon, because how are you going to win? Obviously, like I said, they're the pseudo win con Pokemon that can just hold their own against a lot of Pokemon, but they don't always just win the game. You also have to be dealing damage a lot of the time. So a lot of control teams are going to be made out of 1 to 2 bulky Pokemon, 1 to 3 bulky Pokemon, a couple of control-y Pokemon, things with Intimidate and lowering stat attacks, Snarl, Intimidate, Will-O-Wisp, Parting Shot, all these Pokemon. But then you also still have a damage dealer or 2, or a damage mode, which is really conceivable damage that is really dedicated, things like Durant, Dragapult, things that are going to just Dynamax and deal an insane amount of damage. And obviously right now I'm talking about VGC 2020, but we also do have a couple of examples of teams not in VGC 2020 that are control and did really, really well at tournaments, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, for the rest of this section, we have control Pokemon, damage dealers. So first off, a couple of really good damage dealers, Pokemon that don't really have to do anything except just attack a couple of times to be really good. And they also do other stuff. Most of these are really bulky and just really good in general. So first off, we have Conkeldurr. It just deals good damage the whole time, being able to just sit there, take up a bunch of hits. It's Assault Vest typically, or Flame Orb if you want to deal damage with it. But Rock Slide and your fighting attack moves, you have various other attacks like Ice Punch, Fire Punch, Thunder Punch. You have a lot of punch moves, punch everybody. But Conkeldurr can be really good. And then we have other Pokemon like Rotom Wash, being able to deal up a lot of damage, sit there and Nasty Plot potentially if your opponent's really going to focus down on your Snorlax or Milotic or anything. You can Nasty Plot, then Dynamax, deal a lot of damage like that. And then Tyranitar, Excadrill, they don't have to be together, they can be separate. But, things like Weakness Policy Tyranitar and even Weakness Policy Excadrill, they can just deal a lot of damage. And when you're using these Pokemon, you do want to be able to deal damage. Like with a control team, a lot of the times, if you only focus on your control Pokemon, it is kind of hard to take a win con. That's why I call these pseudo win cons instead of straight win cons. If they just won the game immediately, you would never see a team without them. So when you have a little bit more of a balance of a team of damage dealers, control support Pokemon, as well as your pseudo win con kind of Pokemon, then you really get a really strong control team that can go deal damage if it has to. It can also just disrupt the opponent, interrupt the opponent from really doing anything, and control the pace of the game, which is really what you want to do with control teams. Next we have damage mode, which is, like I briefly touched upon, was the Durant maximizing its damage output, Dynamaxing, doing an insane amount of damage. It also has access to Max Steel Spike and Max Quake, being able to do an insane amount of damage while also buffing your pseudo win con. I saw one time, and we'll talk about this more in a moment, but this team did really, really well at, I think it was Collinsville, getting first place with Milotic and Durant, and that was a very typical lead that he would have, was Milotic, Durant doing an insane amount of damage, but more importantly, being able to hit a Max Steel Spike or a Max Quake to buff that Milotic, and then Milotic also just uses Coil turn 1, and instantly it's just +2 in defense, or +1/+1 in defense and special defense, and it just instantly is really, really hard to take care of that Milotic, and he said that he could even 1v3, 1v4 Pokemon with just that Milotic, which makes this damage mode really, really strong. If you also want to go into damage mode, you can also use things like Dragapult, Duraludon, other Pokemon that deal a lot of damage, but aren't like only going to be dealing damage. They're also like fairly bulky. Obviously not Dragapult or Duraludon, but there are other damage mode Pokemon that are fairly bulky, like the damage dealer section. All of these are pretty interchangeable. Like, you don't have to use like just damage mode Pokemon when you're going for this kind of control team. Anyway, that's about it for our actual overview. We'll go ahead and go over some sample teams for VGC 2020 and then our history pretty briefly. So first off, we have sample teams. Andrew Ding, first place at Collinsville. This is the team I was talking about that used that Gothitelle. I said Gothitelle. I was looking at it. But that used the Durant and Milotic to its maximum potential. Used it really, really well. Leading those two very frequently. Being able to set up your Durant, or max your Durant, set up your Milotic while your opponent just has to deal with that. You have Intimidate there with Arcanine. You also have Trapping with the Gothitelle, which is a really powerful part of control teams. You don't have to have this, that's why I didn't mention it before, but like Trapping is really powerful in that, just because you're able to keep your opponent Pokemon locked in and then put out your Intimidate over and over, and just really, really powerful. We saw this in the past with Gothitelle and then double Intimidate being really, really powerful, just being able to like cycle that over and over. It's really, really good. And then we have Duraludon, or the Durant, as like the damage mode. Tyranitar is pretty bulky. It also can do damage pretty well. It probably had weakness policy. I don't know for a fact. And then Sylveon as another damage dealer. And a pretty well-balanced team as far as control and damage dealing goes. And it was really good. It has a really pseudo win con with Milotic. Like he was saying before, Milotic is a big win con against a lot of teams. This was when Tyranitar and Excadrill were very, very prevalent in the game. So Milotic kind of just walls that team out entirely, which is really, really powerful. And then next we have Fevzi Ozcan. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that last name or first name, but I'm pretty sure it's Fevzi. He got 5th at Malmo Regional. Now this isn't an entirely control team, although it is based on some control aspects with a damage mode of being control. So you obviously have that Intimidate with Incineroar, and then Screams with the Lapras. Lapras Gigantamaxing, being able to set up the Aurora Veil immediately, and then you also have Alcremie for support, being able to heal it as well as being able to help it do more damage with Decorate or Helping Hand, and then you have a Trick Room mode that can control the speed of the game as well. Overall, it's a pretty control-based team, and it's pretty awesome, and it did really well at a big regional. So yeah, these sample teams are really cool, and VGC 2020, they're both fairly new. You know, Andrew Ding was before Season 3, but we're currently in Season 3, and that's when Fevzi's team took place, taking very high place at the regional was in Season 3. So those are our VGC 2020 sample teams, and then we also have one tab here of history of control. I know one of these is kind of cheating. It was the Parish Trap team, Wolf Glick's first place Parish Trap team, although it is a really control-based team, being able to control when your opponent can switch in, switch out, controlling their attack with Intimidates and so on and so forth. But I would like to highlight Alvin Hedayat's team as well. Hedayat, I mispronounced that name. I should have just said Alvin and like Fevzi, but oh well. So yeah, Alvin's team, he did get first place at Collinsville in 2018, 2 years ago. 2018 was a pretty defensive format. It was not insanely aggressive like 2019 and a few formats before that. However, 2018 did have some really good control teams, and this was one of the really cool ones. It has multiple Intimidate with Mega Manectric and the Scrafty, both having Intimidate, really, really powerful. And then we also have Curselax. Actually, it wasn't Curselax. It was just regular Snorlax with Belly Drum. So you would just like Belly Drum and then heal up some and then do a lot of damage after that. It's very naturally bulky. You can set up Trick Room with the Porygon. And Porygon is also very bulky with Eviolite and so on. And then Tapu Fini is also very bulky. So you have a lot of very bulky Pokemon. And then you also have a damage dealing attack mode, a very good attack mode. So it was Choice Scarf Tapu Fini, which is really interesting, with Soak. And then you can use the Mega Manectric or the Kartana to deal out an insane amount of damage with Soak. So that was a really powerful attack, an attack mode of this team. So he could use it very control based, or he could also go into that attack mode and just take huge knockouts turn one with Kartana, Tapu Fini, or Tapu Fini and the Manectric lead. And that was a really, really cool way of playing the team. And then he also has multiple Scrafty, or multiple Intimidate with the Scrafty and Manectric, and other bulky Pokemon, like I said. It's a very control-based team, and it's really, really powerful, and it got first place at Collinsville Regional in 2018. Awesome stuff. And then the Wolf-Glick team, like I was saying, it's very bulky. It has Intimidate, 2 forms of Intimidate with the Arcanine and the Scrafty. It also is a Perish Song, Perish Trap team, which is another form of control. It's a subcategory of control, and it's very, very powerful, and both of these players are amazing, Alvin and Wolf, and they still continue to take very, very high placements. You know, Wolf is a world champion and still is very prevalent in VGC 2020. So definitely check those players out. Definitely check out Wolf Glick. He has a YouTube as well, and a very good, very renowned player. But yeah, that's about it for Control Team. If you have any more questions about anything, you can go ahead and comment them down below. If you want to suggest any kind of team or popular strategy or Pokemon to do a guide on, go ahead and comment them down below. It means a lot to me. Like and subscribe if you like this kind of content, or if you just want to see more of this kind of content, like and subscribe. It means so much to me. Thank you so much for watching, and that's about it. Goodbye.